Assalamu alaikum. Okay, so in this lecture, we'll discuss the adrenal sex hormones and the adrenal medulla. So, the adrenal sex hormones are mainly secreted by zonal reticularis. As we've already studied, adrenal is a small gland that is present on the superior poles of both kidneys. But adrenal gland is very important due to the hormones it produces. Aldosterone, that is important in mineralocorticoid, in minerals metabolism, concentration, regulation. Glucocorticoids are very important for the energy production, increasing the level of glucose in the body, etc. And then there are the adrenal sex hormones, which are released by the thinnest zone of the adrenal cortex, that is the zona reticularis. So, zona reticularis of adrenal cortex mainly secretes androgens, some androgens. Main androgen production is via testes in males and ovaries in females. But in males, to some extent, this zone releases dihydroepiandrosterone. Okay, so we were talking about the male sex hormone or the androgen. So the main male sex hormone that is produced by the zona reticularis is dihydroepiandrosterone. Dihydroepiandrosterone. It is also a steroid hormone, whereas in females, progesterone and estrogens are released in minute quantities from here. Now, as I've told you, the major androgens would be released from the sex organs, that is testosterone, that is the more potent form, would be released from the testes of the males, and progesterone and estrogen in large quantities would be released from the ovaries. The function of these hormones is the growth of the pubic and axillary hair in females, whereas in males it acts on the growth of the sexual organs, but that too to a much smaller extent. Much of the growth of the pubic and the axillary hair in the females results from the action of these adrenal androgens. Adrenal androgens can produce appreciable masculinization when secreted in excessive amounts. So, if dihydroepiandrosterone is released in large amounts, it would cause masculine features in the males, but if it is released in higher amounts in females, these adrenal androgens would cause masculinization in females, that is broader chest, stronger bones, as well as fat distribution would be disturbed, body would be more masculine, men-like. Now let's talk about the adrenal medulla. So the medulla is the innermost part of the adrenal gland. Adrenal cortex is the outer part, which is covered by the capsule, and then inside it, the innermost part is the adrenal medulla. As I've told you, adrenal cortex is mostly derived from the mesoderm, that is, it is glandular in nature, whereas adrenal medulla is derived from the ectoderm, which ectodermal neural crest cells, which make up the nervous system of the body. So this adrenal medulla is located at the center of the adrenal gland, and it contains chromaffin cells. It is functionally related to the sympathetic nervous system and secretes catecholamines, which are epinephrine, which is the main hormone that is released from this part, then norepinephrine and dopamine to some extent. These medullary hormones are derivatives of tyrosine amino acids. So we can see a difference here. The other hormones which were released by cortex were mostly steroid in nature, whereas these hormones are derivatives of amino acids, tyrosine. So steroids would act directly in the nucleus on the DNA. Tyrosine have different mechanism of action. Now these catecholamines, they would activate sympathetic nervous system, and sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight system that is activated whenever the person is in fear of his or her life, or whenever a sudden boost in energy is needed, as in when the person is very angry or when he or she is fighting. These would be released in larger quantities. Normally 80% of the hormonal secretion of the adrenal medulla is epinephrine, which is also known as adrenaline. It would increase the heart rate, cause palpitations, that is louder heartbeats that can be heard or felt. It would increase the blood pressure, all these things which are activated in the sympathetic nervous system, under the sympathetic nervous system. Removal of the adrenal medulla would reduce the plasma epinephrine to very low levels, but it does not alter the plasma norepinephrine. So as plasma epinephrine is mainly released from this adrenal medulla, if we remove this surgically, it would lower the epinephrine levels, but it would not have much effect on norepinephrine levels. This proves that medulla is not an important source for norepinephrine. There are other places from where norepinephrine is released or secreted. Most circulating norepinephrine arises from the postganglionic sympathetic neurons that are part of the peripheral nervous system. Because many of the actions of the epinephrine are also mediated by norepinephrine, the adrenal medulla is not essential for life. Adrenal cortex is absolutely essential for life, but adrenal medulla not so much. So let me explain to you the concept behind the ganglions. So central nervous system consists of brain and then the spinal cord. So whatever functions we are performing, the main orders for those functions are carried by nerve impulses, which are electrical signals from the brain via spinal cord, or some actions may also be controlled via spinal cord directly. So what happens is, there are neurons which are arising from the spinal cord, which make up a bunch when they exit the spinal cord, outside the spinal cord, which is known as a ganglion. So the neurons which are present between the spinal cord and that ganglion are known as preganglionic neurons, whereas those which are present between the end organ or muscle and the ganglion are known as postganglionic neurons. So this is a preganglionic sympathetic neuron which is present carrying signals from the spinal cord towards the adrenal medulla. This is acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter that performs different functions in the body. It mainly carries the signals of the autonomic nervous system, which are parasympathetic in their action. So the neural signal activates this, and the chromaffin cell is in fact a modified postganglionic sympathetic neuron. So these postganglionic sympathetic neurons, they occur throughout the body, and this adrenal medulla is also a kind of modified postganglionic sympathetic neuron. And due to nerve impulses from the CNS, this would release epinephrine and norepinephrine. Epinephrine is the neurohormone that enters the blood and then travels through the blood to the target tissue where it has its desired effects. Now let's look at the synthesis of catecholamines, how these hormones are made. So they are derivatives of phenylalanine. An enzyme which is known as phenylalanine hydroxylase acts on the phenylalanine and transforms it into tyrosine. So we call these hormones derivatives of tyrosine, that is from this amino acid. Then enzyme acts on the tyrosine, that is known as tyrosine hydroxylase, that detaches a OH group from the tyrosine and it transforms into dihydroxyphenylalanine. Dopa decarboxylase is another enzyme that acts on it and it is transformed into dopamine. Dopamine oxidase acts on it and it is then transformed into norepinephrine. It is known as norepinephrine then. Then there is another enzyme that is known as phenylethanolamine N-methyltransferase or PNMT. It is mainly found in brain and adrenal medulla. It acts on the norepinephrine and the end hormone, that is the epinephrine, is formed. So norepinephrine is a precursor to epinephrine. This epinephrine would then travel through the blood to the end tissue, target tissue, and act on it. Now let's look at metabolism of the catecholamines. So there is an enzyme that is known as catechol-O-methyltransferase, which acts on both adrenaline and noradrenalin, and it changes it into meta-adrenaline and meta-noradrenalin. Another enzyme, monoamine oxidase, acts on it and transforms it into vinyl mandelic acid. This vinyl mandelic acid is the waste product or end product that is then removed via urine, excreted via urine outside the body. So if someone asks you how the excretion of catecholamines takes place, or excretion of adrenaline and noradrenaline takes place, you may cite this thing, that they are transformed into VMA, that is a waste product, and that is excreted in the urine. Now all the hormones, they act on the body through different receptors. The receptors which are associated with catecholamines, we are going to study those now. The effects of norepinephrine and epinephrine are brought about by the actions of two classes of receptors, which are alpha and beta adrenergic receptors. These receptors are present on nearly all around the body, nearly on all functional cells of the body. Alpha receptors, but they are divided into groups, and specific receptors are present on specific cells. Alpha receptors are subdivided into two groups, alpha 1 and alpha 2, whereas beta is divided into beta 1, beta 2 and beta 3 receptors. These are variations of these receptors. Norepinephrine excites mainly alpha 1, alpha 2 and beta 1 receptors, whereas epinephrine excites both types of receptors, that is alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1 and beta 2. So how do they act on the end organ? Alpha 1 receptor acts on the GQ coupled receptor, and it would increase the formation of DAG. DAG is diacylglycerol, and IP3, which is inositol triphosphate, and these two secondary transmitters would release intracellular calcium level. Alpha 2 receptors act on via GI. Alpha 2 receptors act via GI mechanism, that is, they decrease the adenylyl cyclase and decrease cyclic AMP. So I is always inhibiting, whereas S is stimulating. Beta 1, beta 2 and dopaminergic 1 receptors are GS coupled, that is, they are stimulatory and they act via increasing the adenylyl cyclase inside the cell and increasing the cyclic AMP. Cyclic AMP have many effects on the body, some of which are activation of brain. Cyclic AMP also causes increase of contractions in the intestines. This cyclic AMP is also released when we take in caffeine or nicotine, so that is why we drink tea or coffee or smoke cigarettes, because it has soothing effect on the brain, increases gastric motility, etc. That is why we are hooked on cigarettes, we are hooked on coffee and tea. Now let's talk about some functions of adrenaline and noradrenaline. So the first effect they have is on the gastrointestinal tract. They increase the metabolic function, they increase the gastrointestinal tract and the metabolism of the body. They increase the glycogenolysis in the liver, that is breaking down of stored glucose, which is stored in the form of glycogen, and skeletal muscles. So in liver is the main reservoir for the glucose. Then comes the skeletal muscles. The glucose is stored in the form of glycogen. So when this glycogen is broken down under the effect of adrenaline and noradrenaline, it causes increased blood glucose level. They also increase mobilization of free fatty acids for the production of more energy and increase the basal metabolic rate. That is the rate of metabolism when the patient is at rest. They also have effect on heart. Adrenaline has stronger effects in heart than noradrenaline. It causes increased heart rate, that is beats per minute of heart, increased force of contraction. Force of contraction means how much blood is being put out of the heart by contraction. It increases that. It increases the cardiac output. It also increases the excitability of the heart. They also have effect on the blood vessels. Adrenaline causes vasoconstriction of blood vessels in peripheral blood vessels via acting on alpha 1 receptors. So in the peripheries, arms, legs, hands, feet, etc., it causes vasoconstriction, that is, the blood vessel gets constricted, the lumen gets narrower, the blood vessel gets narrower, increases blood pressure, but mainly it causes vasodilation of blood vessels via beta 2 receptors in the skeletal muscles and coronary artery. Hence total effect is it would decrease the total peripheral resistance. So on the central vessels, that is the vessels of the skeletal muscles and the heart vessels, coronary arteries, it would cause vasodilation, that is dilatation, relaxation of muscles of the blood vessels via beta 2 receptors. Beta 2 are specific for the heart and the skeletal muscles. So it would decrease the total peripheral resistance, so more blood would flow towards the periphery. although it is causing vasoconstriction in the peripheral blood vessels. Noradrenalin causes vasoconstriction of blood vessels throughout the body via alpha 1 receptors because it can only act on alpha 1. So that is why it has more effect on alpha 1. That is why it increases the tension in the peripheral blood vessels. It causes vasoconstriction there, and hence it would increase the total peripheral resistance. Adrenaline increases systolic blood pressure because of increased heart rate and force of contraction, whereas it causes decreased diastolic blood pressure due to decreased total peripheral resistance. Total peripheral resistance is when the how much resistance is faced by the blood, what is when it is being pumped in the peripheral blood vessels. Whereas non-adrenaline would increase the diastolic blood pressure greatly because it increases the total peripheral resistance, and it would also increase systolic blood pressure slightly. They also have effect on the respiration because beta 2 receptors are also present on the lungs. It would increase the respiratory rate as well as would cause bronchodilation, that is relaxation of the bronchi, and hence more air could be pulled inside the lungs. So as I told you, these are fight or flight hormones. So what happens when we are in a fight or we are trying to flee from a scene where we could get hurt? We need more oxygen to run, we need more blood being pumped towards our periphery, we need faster heart rate, we need greater contractility, we need more sweat to cool down our body. So all of these things happen due to effect of these hormones. On the skin, it increases the secretion of sweat glands and contraction of the erector pili muscles. So we often speak that when we are in near some accident or when we are scared by any story or any other thing, that the hair on our skin, it stands up. कहते हैं ना रोंगटे खड़े हो गए, उर्दू में कहते हैं रोंगटे खड़े हो जाना. That is due to the contraction of the erector pili muscles which are present in the hair of the skin. So they get contracted and the hair stands up. On the gastrointestinal tract, it causes smooth muscle relaxation and sphincters constriction. Now let's suppose you are in a jungle where you see a lion and you are trying to run away from it. What would you need then? You would need more power to run away. That is being achieved via glycogenolysis, providing more glucose in the blood. That is being achieved via increased heart rate. You are in fear, your heart rate increases. Increased heart rate, increased contractility, increased breathing rate, respiration to compensate for the oxygen supply, increased oxygen demand. Bronchodilation occurs. But do you need to go to washroom right then? Like, do you need to defecate? No, that impulse is subdued, that is controlled. That is why that happens? That happens because of these hormones. The sphincters would get contracted and the smooth muscles of the gut would get relaxed. So there would be no more peristalsis to push the food further down into the colon and forward. There would be no defecation reflex, etc. And in the genitourinary system, the bladder muscles would relax. We do not need to urinate right then and there. So we do not feel the urge. The bladder muscle relaxes. Contraction does not occur. Sphincters would constrict so that the blood does not get released from the urethra. And it may cause ejaculation in males and uterine muscle relaxation in females, because there are alpha 1 receptors which are present on the vas deferens, and contraction of the alpha 1 muscles may cause ejaculation in males, whereas there are beta 2 receptors present on the uterine muscles, so it causes relaxation there in females. Moreover, these also have effect on the pupil. Say what we are studying right now, when we are studying pharmacology, you'll come across these things again in the form of sympathetic and non-sympathetic autonomic nervous system. All of the effects of the catecholamines which we are studying right now, these are the effects which come under sympathetic autonomic nervous system, whereas parasympathetic have opposite effects. So what happens in pupils? These hormones cause contraction of dilated pupillae muscle, hence causes dilation of pupils. We need more light to look clearly so that we can run. This is an example that I am giving. Okay, so follow that example of the lion in the forest. You're running away from it. You need more light so that you can see clearly, you can focus, and you can run in that direction, which is safe. So dilation of pupils would occur when the adrenergic stimulation. Under the adrenergic stimulation, the radial muscles alpha 1 and the sphincter muscles, which have muscarinic receptor, they would respond in such a way that it would cause mydriasis, that is relaxation of the pupil. They also have effect on the central nervous system, that is the increased activity of the brain. You need to think fast at that point, and they would secretions would increase during flight, fright and fear. So when you need to flee from a site, when you are fearing something, these are released, these muscles are released, these hormones are released. What is the difference between epinephrine and norepinephrine? We'll just look at some differences. Epinephrine has greater action on heart as compared to norepinephrine. Epinephrine is a weaker vasoconstrictor as compared to norepinephrine, which is a stronger vasoconstrictor. That is why epinephrine causes decreased total peripheral resistance, whereas non-epinephrine causes increased total peripheral resistance. Epinephrine have more effect on metabolism as compared to norepinephrine, and total peripheral resistance would be less increased in epinephrine or reduced, whereas it would be markedly increased in the norepinephrine. Let's talk about secretion of adrenaline and noradrenalin. The other names of epinephrine are adrenaline and noradrenalin. The secretion of epinephrine by the adrenal medulla rapidly increases in response to when we are exercising. These hormones would be released in huge quantities. During emergencies or during exposure to cold, we need warmth for our body. These would be increased. In severe hypoglycemia, when there is severe decrease in the blood sugar level, which is a stimulus that causes a rise in all stress hormones. So in severe hypoglycemia, when we've not eaten for too much time, there is decreased blood glucose level. All stress hormones would be released. What are the stress hormones? The cortisol, the growth hormone, glucagon and epinephrine. Now about the applied physiology of the adrenal cortex, that is the diseases. We'll study those on Friday inshallah, and we'll be nearing the end of our lecture on Friday, I think. So see you tomorrow inshallah. Okay. And बच्चे about the answers to the questions, I'll post those too, along with the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone pathway. So please draw that and send that to me in the group also. Okay, bachche, take care. Allah Hafiz.